Okay, I think we're back on track. Welcome back, everyone. It is Vexing Cat, and we return to the Count of Monte Cristo. So last week, chapter 23 of the Count of Monte Cristo, the prison register. The day following the events just recorded, a man of about 30 or 32 years of age, clad in a bright blue coat, nankeen trousers, and a white waistcoat, and having both the appearance and the accent of an Englishman, presented himself before the mayor of Marseille. Monsieur, said he, I am head clerk of the firm of Thompson and French of Rome. We have we have had business connections with Morel and Son of Marseille for the last 10 years, involving 100,000 francs or so of our money. As reports are current that the firm is faced with ruin, we are beginning to feel somewhat anxious. So I have come from Rome for the sole purpose of obtaining some information from you in regard to the firm. I know well enough, monsieur, that misfortune seems to have dogged Monsieur Morel for the past 4 or 5 years, replied the mayor. He has lost 5 ships, one after the other, and has suffered badly through the bankruptcy of 3 or 4 firms. But though I am his creditor to the extent of some 10,000 francs, it is not my place to give you any information of the state of his finances. If you ask me in my capacity as mayor what I think of Monsieur Morel, I can but answer that he is honest. He is as honest as it is possible for a man to be, and that up to present, as he has fulfilled his engagements with absolute punctuality. That is all I can tell you, monsieur. If you wish to know more, apply to Monsieur de Beauville, inspector of prisons, Rue de Noël. Noëls? I'm guessing. Rue de Noëls, number 15. I believe he has 200,000 francs invested with the firm, and if there are really any grounds for apprehension, you will doubtless find him better informed on the subject than I am. The Englishman appeared to appreciate this great delicacy on the part of the mayor, bade him good morning, and with the gait peculiar to the sons of Great Britain, set off for the street mentioned. M. de Beauville was in his office. With the coolness of his race, the Englishman put almost the same question to him as he had put to the mayor. Unfortunately, your fears are only too well founded, monsieur, exclaimed M. de Beauville, and you see before you a ruined man. I have 200,000 francs in that firm, and they were to constitute the dowry of my daughter, who is to be married in a fortnight. 100,000 francs of this sum was redeemable on the 15th of this month, and another 100,000 francs on the 15th of next month. I notified Monsieur Morel of the fact that I desire to have the payment punctually made, and here he comes, hardly an hour back, and tells me that if his ship, the Pharaon, does not return by the 15th, he will find it impossible to effect the payment. It looks very much like bankruptcy. Then, monsieur, you fear for your money. I consider it as good as lost. Well, then, I will buy it from you. You will, but at an enormous discount, I presume. No, for 200,000 francs. Our firm does not conduct business in that way, he added with a smile. What is more, I will pay you cash down. The Englishman took from his pocket a bundle of banknotes amounting to about double the sum M. de Beauville was fearful of losing. An expression of joy lit up M. de Beauville's face, but he restrained his feelings and said, I must warn you, monsieur, that in all probability you will not get 6% of that sum. That has nothing to do with me, was the reply. It is the affair of Thompson and French for whom I am acting. It may be that it is to their interest to hasten the ruin of a rival firm. What I do know, monsieur, is that I am ready to hand over this sum in exchange for a deed of assignment. All I require of you is a commission." "That is but just, monsieur," exclaimed M. de Boville. "The commission is generally 1.5. Do you want 2, 3, 5%, or even more? You have only to say the word." "I am like my firm, monsieur," replied the Englishman, with a smile. "I do not conduct business on those lines. My commission is something entirely different. You are the inspector of prisons, are you not?" "I have been for the last 14 years and more. Do you keep a register of entrances and dismissals?" "Of course. Are there any notes in the register pertaining to the different prisoners?" "Each prisoner has his dossier." "Well, monsieur, I was educated at Rome by a poor old abbe who suddenly disappeared. Later, I learned that he had been detained in the Chateau d'If, and I should like to have some details in regard to his death." "What was his name?" "The Abbe Faria." "Oh, yes, I remember him perfectly. He died last February." "You have a good memory, monsieur." "I remember this case because the poor fellow's death was accompanied by a very peculiar circumstance. The abbe's dungeon was about 45 or 50 feet from that of a Bonapartist agent, one of those who had greatly contributed to the return of the usurper in 1815. He was very determined. He was a very determined and dangerous man." "Really?" said the Englishman. "Yes," was the reply. "I had an opportunity of seeing this man myself in 1816 or 17. He could only go down to his dungeon accompanied by a file of soldiers. He made a deep impression on me, and I shall never forget his face." "Oh, really?" The Englishman gave the ghost of a smile. "Edmond Dantes was the man's name," continued the inspector, "and he must have either procured some tools or else made some, for a passage was found by means of which the two prisoners communicated with one another." "The passage was doubtless made with a view to escape?" "Exactly, but unfortunately for the prisoners, the abbe was seized with an attack of epilepsy and died." "I understand. That must have put an end to their plans. As far as the dead man was concerned, it certainly did, but not for the one who lived. On the contrary, Dantès saw a means of effecting his escape more easily. He doubtless thought that the prisoners who die in the Château d'If are buried in an ordinary cemetery, so he carried the corpse into his own cell, and took its place in the sack in which it had been sewn up, and waited for the burial. The Château d'If has no cemetery, however. The dead are simply thrown into the sea with a cannonball attached to their feet." "Is that really so?" exclaimed the Englishman. "Yes, monsieur," continued the inspector. "You may imagine the fugitive's astonishment when he felt himself being hurled down the rocks. I should like to have seen his face at that moment. That would have been somewhat difficult." "Never mind," said Monsieur de Boville, whom the certainty of getting his 200,000 francs had put into a good humor. "Never mind, I can imagine it." And he burst out laughing. "I can also imagine it," said the Englishman, with a forced laugh. "So I suppose the fugitive was drowned, but if he was, no doubt some official report must have been made on the occurrence." "Hmm. Oh, yes. A death certificate was made out. You see, his relatives, if he had any, might be interested to know whether he was dead or alive. Would you like to see what documents we have relating to the poor abbe?" "It would give me great pleasure," replied his companion. "Let us go into my office, then." And they both passed into the office of Monsieur de Boville. Everything was in perfect order. Each register had its number, each dossier had its file. The inspector gave the Englishman his easy chair, set before him the register and the dossier relating to the Chateau d'If, and let him look through them at his leisure, while he himself sat in a corner of the room and read his paper. The Englishman had no difficulty in finding the dossier relating to the Abbe Faria. It appeared as though the story which the inspector had related greatly interested him, for, after having perused the first documents, he turned over the leaves until he reached the deposition respecting Edmond Dantes. There he found everything arranged in due order. The denunciation, the examination, Morel's petition, Monsieur de Villefort's marginal notes. He folded up the denunciation noiselessly and put it into his pocket, read the examination, and noted the name of Noirtier was not mentioned in it. Perused, too, the application dated the 10th of April, 1815, in which Morel, on the deputy's advice, exaggerated with the best intentions, for Napoleon was then on the throne, the services Dantes had rendered to the imperial cause, services which Villefort's certificate rendered incontestable. Then he saw through it all. The petition to Napoleon, kept back by Villefort, had become, under the Second Restoration, a terrible weapon against him in the hands of the Procureur du Roi. On searching further, he was no longer astonished to find in the register the following remarks placed in brackets against his name: Edmond Dantes, an inveterate Bonapartist, took an active part in the return from the Isle of Elba, to be kept in solitary confinement and under strict supervision. He compared the writing of the bracketed remarks with that of the certificate placed beneath Morel's petition, and felt convinced that they were both in the same handwriting. They were both written by Villefort. "Thanks," said the Englishman, closing the register with much noise. "I have all I want. Now it is my turn to perform my promise. Give me a simple assignment of your credit, acknowledge therein receipt of the cash, and I will hand you over the money." He rose, gave his seat at the desk to Monsieur de Beauville, who took it without ceremony, and drew up the required assignment, while the Englishman counted out the banknotes on the ledge of the filing cabinet. Chapter 24. Morel and Son. Anyone who had left Marseille a few years back, knowing the interior workings of the firm of Morel and Son, and returned at this period, would have noted a great change. Instead of the animation, comfort, and happiness that seemed to radiate from a prosperous house, instead of the merry faces seen from behind the window curtains, of the busy clerks hurrying to and fro with their pins behind their ears, instead of the yard filled with bales of goods and echoing with the shouts and laughter of the porters, he would at once have perceived a certain sadness and a gloomy listlessness. The corridor was deserted and the yard empty. Of the numerous employees who formerly filled the office, 2 only remained. The one, a young man of 23 or 24, named Emmanuel, who was in love with Morel's daughter, and had stayed with the firm in spite of his relatives' efforts to get him to resign. The other, an old, one-eyed cashier called Cocles, a nickname which had been given him by the young people who used to throng this buzzing hive, now almost uninhabited, and which had so completely taken the place of his real name that in all probability he would now not have answered to the latter. Cocles had remained in Monsieur Morel's service, and a singular change had been effected in his position. He had been raised to the rank of cashier, and at the same time lowered to that of servant. Nevertheless, it was the same good, patient Cocles, inflexible where arithmetic was concerned, the only point on which he would stand his ground against the whole world, if need be, even against Monsieur Morel himself. Nothing had yet occurred to shake Cocles' belief in the firm. Last month's payments had been effected with rigorous punctuality. Cocles had detected an error of 70 centimes made by Monsieur Morel to his own disadvantage, and the same day he had brought the money to his chief, who took it, and with a sad smile dropped it into the almost empty drawer, saying, "Thanks, Cocles. You are a pearl among cashiers." No man could have been happier than Cocles was at hearing his master speak thus. For praise from Monsieur Morel, the pearl of all honest men of Marseille, counted more with Cocles than a gift of 50 crowns. Monsieur Morel had spent many a cruel hour since the end of the month to enable him to meet his liabilities. He had been obliged to gather in all his resources, and fearing lest a rumor of his difficulties should be spread about the town of Marseille, when he was known that he had had recourse to such extremities, he had himself gone to the fair at Beaucaire to sell some of his wife's and daughter's jewelry and some of his silverware. By means of this sacrifice, the honor of the firm had been preserved, but funds were now exhausted. Following the reports that had been noised abroad, credit was no longer to be had, and Monsieur Morel's only hope of meeting the payment of 100,000 francs due to Monsieur Beauville on the 15th of that month, and the 100,000 due on the 15th of the following month, lay in the return of the Pharaon. He had had news of her departure from another ship that had weighed anchor at the same time and had arrived safely in port. This was more than a fortnight ago, and yet there was still no further news of the Pharaon. Such was the state of affairs when the representative of Thomson and French of Rome called on Monsieur Morel. Emmanuel received him. Every fresh face was a new cause of alarm to the young man, for it suggested yet one more anxious creditor come to question the head of the firm, and he was ever desirous of sparing his employer an embarrassing interview. He now questioned the newcomer, but the stranger would have nothing to do with Monsieur Emmanuel, and wished to see Monsieur Morel in person. Emmanuel rose with a sigh, and summoning Cocles, bade him conduct the stranger to Monsieur Morel. Cocles walked in front, and the stranger followed. On the staircase they met a pretty girl of 16 or 17, who looked at the stranger with an uneasy expression. "Is Monsieur Morel in his office, Mademoiselle Julie?" asked the cashier. "Yes, at least I think so," answered the girl hesitatingly. "Go first and see whether my father is there, Cocles, and announce the gentleman." "It would be useless to announce me, mademoiselle," replied the Englishman. "Monsieur Morel does not know my name. All that is, all that it, all that this good man can say is that I am the head clerk of Messieurs Thomson and French of Rome, and with whom your father has business connections." The girl turned pale and passed downstairs, while Cocles and the Englishman went up. On seeing the stranger enter his office, Monsieur Morel closed the ledger he had before him, rose and offered him a chair. 14 years had worked a great change in the worthy merchant, who, but 36 at the beginning of this story, was now nearing 50. His hair had turned white. Anxiety and worry had plowed deep furrows on his brow, and the look in his eyes, once so firm and staunch, had now become vague and irresolute. The Englishman looked at him with a feeling of curiosity mingled with interest. "You wish to speak with me, monsieur," said Morel, becoming embarrassed under the stranger's steady gaze. "Yes, monsieur. Messieurs Thompson and French of Rome have to pay 300,000 or 400,000 francs in France during the course of the present month and the next. Knowing your strict promptitude in regard to payments, they have collected all the bills bearing your signature, and have charged me to collect the money from you as it falls due, and to make appropriate use of the money." Monsieur Morel heaved a deep sigh, and passed his hand over his sweat-bedewed forehead. "You hold bills signed by me, monsieur?" asked Morel. "Yes, monsieur, for a considerable sum. But first of all," he continued, taking a bundle of papers from his pocket, I have here an assignment for 200,000 francs made over to our firm by Monsieur de Beauville, the inspector of prisons. Do you acknowledge this debt?" "Yes, monsieur. He invested the money with me at 4.5%, nearly 5 years ago, half of it being redeemable on the 15th of the present month, and the other half on the 15th of the coming month." "Just so. Then I have here 32,500 francs payable at the end of the month. These are bills signed by you and assigned to our firm by the holders." "I recognize them," said Morel, whose face became red with shame at the thought that for the first time in his life he would in all probability not be able to honor his signature. "Is that all?" "No, monsieur. I have these bills for the end of the month assigned to us by Pascal and Wild and Turner of Marseille, about 55,000 francs in all, making a total of 287,500 francs. What Monsieur Morel suffered during this enumeration is impossible to describe. Hey, Panda. Aw, thank you. You too. 287,500 francs, he repeated automatically. "Yes, monsieur," replied the Englishman. "But," he continued after a moment's silence, "I will not conceal from you, Monsieur Morel, that though I am fully aware of your blameless probity up to the present, public report is rife in Marseille that you are not in a position to meet your obligations." At this almost brutal frankness, Morel turned pale. "Up to the present, monsieur," said he, "and it is more than 24 years since I took over the directorship of the firm from my father, who had himself managed it for 35 years, until now, not one bill signed by Morel and Son has ever been presented for payment that has not been duly honored." "I am fully aware of that," replied the Englishman. "But, as one man of honor to another, tell me quite frankly, shall you pay these with the same exactitude?" Morel started, and looked at this man who spoke to him with more assurance than he had hitherto shown. "To questions put with such frankness," said he, "a straightforward answer must be given. Yes, monsieur, I shall pay it, as I hope my ship arrives safely, for its arrival will restore me to the credit which one stroke of ill fortune after another has deprived me of. But should, by some ill chance, this, my last resource, the Pharaon, fail me, I fear, monsieur, I shall be compelled to suspend payment." "The Pharaon is your last hope, then?" "Absolutely the last, and," he continued, "her delay is not natural. She left Calcutta on February the 5th, and should have been here more than a month ago." "What is that?" exclaimed the Englishman, listening intently. "What is the meaning of this noise?" "Oh, heavens!" cried Morel, turning a ghastly color. "What fresh disaster is this?" In truth, there was much noise on the staircase. People were running hither and thither, and now and then a cry of distress was heard. Morel rose to open the door, but his strength failed him and he sank into his chair. The two men sat facing each other. Morel was trembling in every limb, while the stranger was looking at him with an expression of profound pity. The noise ceased, but nevertheless it was apparent that Morel was simply awaiting events. The hubbub was not without reason and would naturally have its sequel. The stranger thought he heard several people come up the stairs quietly and stop on the landing. A key was inserted in the lock of the first door, which creaked on its hinges. Julie entered, her cheeks bathed with tears, supporting himself on the arm of his chair. On the arm of his chair, Morel rose unsteadily. He wanted to speak, but his voice failed him. "Oh, father, father," exclaimed the girl, clasping her hands, "forgive your daughter for being the bearer of bad news, father. Be brave." Morel turned deadly pale. "So, the Pharaon is lost?" he asked in a choked voice. The girl made no answer, but she nodded her head and fell into his arms. "And the crew?" "Saved," said the young girl, "saved by the Bordeaux vessel that has just entered the port." "Thank God," said he, "at least thou strikest me alone." Scarcely had he uttered these words when Madame Morel came in sobbing, followed by Emmanuel. Standing in the background were to be seen the stalwart forms of 7 or 8 half-naked sailors. The Englishman started at sight of these men. He took a step toward them, but then restrained himself and withdrew to the farthest and darkest corner of the room. Madame Morel seated herself in a chair and took her husband's hand in hers, whilst Julie still lay with her head on her father's shoulder. Emmanuel remained in the middle of the room, like a link between the Morel family and the sailors at the door. "How did it happen?" asked Morel. "Draw nearer, Penelon," said the young man, "and relate all that happened." An old sailor, bronzed by tropical suns, advanced, twirling the remains of a hat in his hand. "Good day, my friend," said the ship owner, unable to refrain from smiling through his tears. "What has become of your captain?" "The captain, monsieur, has stayed behind, sick at Palma. But there is nothing serious the matter, and, God willing, you will see him here in a few days, as well as you or I." "I am glad of that. Now, Penelon, say what you have to say." Penelon rolled his quid of tobacco from his left to his right cheek, put his hand before his mouth, turned round, and shot a long jet of dark saliva into the antechamber. Then he drew nearer and, with arms akimbo, said, "Well then, Monsieur Morel, we were somewhere between Cape Blanc and Cape Boyador, sailing along with a good south-southwesterly breeze. After dawdling along under 8 days' calm, when Captain Gaumard comes up to me, I must explain that I was at the helm, and says, 'Daddy Penelon, what do you make of those clouds rising on the horizon?' I was just looking at them myself. 'What do I make of them, Captain?' 'I think they are rising faster than they have any business to do, and they are too black for clouds. That means no mischief.' 'I think so too,' says the captain, 'and I am going to be prepared. We have too much canvas for the gale we shall have in a very short time.' 'A gale,' says I. 'He who bets that what we are going to have is a gale will get more than he bargained for. We are in for a downright good hurricane. For a downright good hurricane. What a phrase. For a downright good hurricane, or I know nothing about it. You could see the wind coming just as you can see the dust at Montredon. Luckily, it had someone to deal with it who had met it before.' 'All hands taken 2 reefs in the topsails,' bawls the captain. Let go the bowliners, brace to, lower the top-gallant sails, haul out the reef tackles on the yards. Well, after being tossed about for 12 hours, we sprung a leak. Penelon, says the captain to me, I believe we are sinking. Give me the helm and go down to the hold. I gave him the helm and went down. We had already shipped 3 feet of water. I came up again crying out, to the pumps, but it was too late. We all set to work, but the faster we pumped, the more water she seemed to take. Well, since we are sinking, says I, let us sink. One can die but once. Is that the example you set, Master Penelon, says the captain. Just wait a bit. He went to his cabin and fetched a brace of pistols. I will blow the brains out of the first man who leaves the pumps, he bellows out. There's nothing like common sense to put courage into a man, continued the sailor, especially as by that time the wind had abated and the sea gone down. Still, the water continued to rise. Not much, it is true, about 2 inches an hour. Nevertheless, it rose. 2 inches an hour does not seem much. But in 12 hours, that is no less than 24 inches, and 24 inches are 2 feet. 2 feet added to the 3 we had before made 5. When a ship has got 5 feet of water inside her, she is as much good as a man with the dropsy. Come along now, says the captain. We have had enough of this. We have done what we could to save the ship. Now we must try to save ourselves. To the boats, boys, as quick as you can. You see, Monsieur Morel, continued Penelon, we loved the Pharaon well enough, but much as a sailor may love his ship, he loves his life more. We required no second telling, especially as the boat seemed to moan and call out to us, get along, save your lives. And the poor Pharaon told no lie. We literally felt her sink under our feet. We had the boat out in a trice, with 8 of us in it. The captain was the last to leave the ship, or rather he would not leave her, so I takes hold of him and throws him down to my comrades, and then I jumps down after him. We were only just in time, for I had no sooner jumped into the boat than the deck burst with a noise like the broadside of a man-of-war. 10 minutes later she pitched forward, then she pitched the other way, and finally began to spin round like a dog after its tail. Then it was goodbye to the Pharaon. As for us, we were 3 days without food or drink. We had already spoken about drawing lots as to which of us would serve as food for the others when we sighted the Gironde. We made signals to her, she sighted us, made towards us, put out her boat, and took us on board. There now, Monsieur Morel, that is exactly how it all happened, on my word of honor as a sailor. Speak up, you others, and say whether it is the truth. A general murmur of assent indicated that the narrator had their voices as to the verity of the subject and the picturesqueness, there we go, and the picturesqueness of the details. Well done, my friends, said Monsieur Morel. You are good fellows. I felt sure I had nothing to blame for what has happened but my own bad luck. It is God's will and not man's doing. Let us submit to the will of God. Now, what pay is due to you? Oh, don't let us speak of that, Monsieur Morel. On the contrary, we must, said the shipowner with a sad smile. Well, then, there is 3 months' pay due to us. Cocles, pay each of these good men 200 francs. At another time, continued Monsieur Morel, I should have added, give each one an extra 200. But times are hard, my friends, and the little bit of money I have left does not belong to me. Excuse me, therefore, and don't think any the worse of me for that. Penelon was visibly and deeply moved, and turning toward his comrades, he exchanged a few words with them. As far as that goes, Monsieur Morel, said he, rolling his quid to the other side of his mouth and shooting a second jet of saliva into the antechamber. As far as that goes, my shipmates and I say that for the time being 50 francs is quite enough for us, and that we will wait for the rest. Thank you, my friends, thank you, Monsieur Morel exclaimed, deeply touched. You are dear good fellows. Take the money, though, and if you find another employer, enter his service. You are free to do so. I have no more ships, and therefore have no further use for sailors. You have no more ships, said Penelon. Well, then, you will build some, and we will wait. A spell of short commons won't hurt us, thank heaven. I have no money to build other ships, Penelon, said the shipowner with a sad smile, so I cannot accept your offer, much as I appreciate it. If you have no money, you surely shall not pay us. Like the Pharaon, we can go under bare poles. Enough, enough, my friend, said Morel, choking with emotion. Leave me, I beg you. We will see each other again at a happier time. Emmanuel, he continued, accompany them and see to it that my wishes are carried out. He made a sign to Cocles, who went on in front, followed by the sailors and finally by Emmanuel. Now, said the shipowner to his wife and daughter, leave me a while. I wish to speak with this gentleman. The two ladies looked at the stranger, whom they had entirely forgotten, and withdrew. When going out, however, the girl cast an entreating look on the Englishman, to which he responded with a smile, such as one would hardly expect to see on those stern features. The two men were left alone. Well, monsieur, said Morel, sinking into his chair, you have seen and heard all. I have nothing further to tell you. Yes, monsieur, I have learnt that you are the victim of fresh misfortune, as unmerited as the rest. This has only confirmed my desire to render you a service. I am one of your principal creditors, am I not? In any case, you are in possession of the bills that will fall due first. Would you like the date of payment prolonged? It would certainly save my honor and consequently my life. How long do you ask? Morel hesitated a moment and then said, 3 months. But do you think Messieurs Thompson and French? Do not worry about that. I will take all responsibility upon myself. Today is the 15th of June. Renew these bills up to the 15th of September, and at 11 o'clock, at that moment the clock struck 11, on the 15th of September I shall present myself. I shall await you, monsieur, said Morel, and you will be paid, or else I shall be dead. These last words were said in such a low voice that the stranger did not hear them. The bills were renewed, and the old ones destroyed, that the unfortunate shipowner was given another 3 months in which to gather together his last resources. The Englishman received his thanks with the coldness peculiar to his race, and bade farewell to Morel, who, calling down blessings on him, accompanied him to the door. On the stairs he met Julie. She pretended to be going down, but in reality she was waiting for him. "Oh, monsieur!" she exclaimed, clasping her hands. "Mademoiselle," said the stranger, one day you will receive a letter signed Sinbad the sailor. Do exactly what the letter bids you to do, no matter how extraordinary the instructions may appear. Will you promise me to do this?" "I promise." "Very good, then. Farewell, mademoiselle. Always remain as good and virtuous as you are now, and I am sure God will reward you by giving you Emmanuel as your husband." Julie uttered a faint exclamation and blushed like a rose, while the stranger nodded a farewell and went on his way. In the yard he met Penelon, who had a roll of 100 francs in each hand, and seemed as though he could not make up his mind to keep them. "Come along with me, my friend," the Englishman said to him. "I should like to have a word with you." Chapter 25. The 5th of September. The extension of time granted by Messieurs Thompson and French's agent, at a time when Morel least expected it, seemed to the poor shipowner like one of those returns to good fortune which announce to man that fate has at last become weary of spending her fury on him. The same day he related to his daughter, his wife, and Emmanuel all that had occurred, and a ray of hope one might almost say of peace, once more entered their hearts. Unfortunately, however, Morrel had other engagements than those with Thompson and French, who had shown themselves so considerate towards him, and, as he had said, one had correspondence only in business and not friends. Any bill signed by Morrel was presented with the most scrupulous exactitude, and thanks to the extension granted by the Englishman, each one was paid by Cocles at sight. Cocles therefore maintained his prophetic calmness and his hope in a better future. Morrel alone realized with terror that if he had to repay 100,000 francs to de Boville on the 15th, as also the 32,500 francs which would fall due on the 30th, he would be a ruined man. He spent the next 3 months in strenuous efforts to gather in all his outstanding resources. Thompson and French's agent had been seen no more at Marseilles. He disappeared a couple of days after his visit to Monsieur Morrel. Thompson and French's agent had been seen no more at Marseilles, and he disappeared a couple of days after his visit to Monsieur Morrel, and had had nothing to do with anyone except the mayor, the inspector of prisons, and Monsieur Morrel. His sojourn there had left no other trace than the different memories. August rolled by in untiring and unsuccessful attempts on the part of Morrel to renew his old credit or to open up fresh ones. Then he remembered Danglars, who was now a millionaire and could save Morrel without taking a penny from his pocket by guaranteeing a loan. But there are times when one feels a repugnance one cannot master, and Morrel had delayed as long as possible before having recourse to this. His feeling of repugnance was justified, for he returned from Paris borne down by the humiliation of a refusal. Yet he uttered no complaint and spoke no harsh word. He embraced his weeping wife and daughter, shook hands with Emmanuel, and closeted himself in his office with Cocles. When he appeared for dinner, he was outwardly quite calm. This apparent calmness, however, alarmed his wife and daughter more than the deepest dejection would have done. Emmanuel tried to reassure them, but his eloquence failed him. He was too well acquainted with the business of the firm not to realize that a terrible catastrophe was pending for the Morrel family. Night came. The two women watched, hoping that when Morrel left his office he would rejoin them, but they heard him pass by their door, stepping very lightly, no doubt lest they should hear and call him. They heard him go to his room and lock the door. Madame Morrel sent her daughter to bed, and an hour later, taking off her shoes, she crept down the landing and peeped through the keyhole to see what her husband was doing. She saw a retreating figure on the landing. It was Julie, who, being anxious, had anticipated her mother. "He is writing," she said to her mother. They understood each other without speaking. Madame Morrel stooped down to the keyhole. Morrel was indeed writing. The terrible idea flashed across her mind that he was making his will. It made her shudder. Yet she had strength enough to say nothing. 2 days passed. On the morning of the 5th of September, Morrel came down, calm as usual, but the agitation of the previous days had left its mark on his pale and careworn face. He was more affectionate towards his wife and daughter than he had ever been. He gazed fondly on the poor child and embraced her again and again. When he left the room, Julie made as if to accompany him, but he pushed her back gently, saying, "Stay with your mother." Julie tried to insist. "I wish it," said Morrel. It was the first time Morrel had ever said "I wish it" to his daughter, but he said it in a tone of such paternal fondness that Julie dared not advance a step. She remained rooted to the spot and spake never a word. An instant later, the door opened again. Julie felt two strong arms about her and a mouth pressing a kiss on her forehead. She looked up with an exclamation of joy. "Maximilian, my brother!" At these words, Madame Morel sprang up, and running toward her son, threw herself in his arms. "Mother, what has happened?" said the young man, looking alternately at Madame Morel and her daughter. "Your letter made me feel very anxious, so I hastened to you." "Julie, go and tell your father that Maximilian has come," said Madame Morel, making a sign to the young man. The girl hastened to obey, but on the first stair she met a young man with a letter in his hand. "Are you not Mademoiselle Julie Morel?" he said with a very pronounced Italian accent. "Read this letter," said the man, handing her a note. The girl snatched the note from his hands, opened it hastily, and read. Opened it hastily and read. There we go. "Go this moment to number 15 Elise de Melhan. Ask the porter for the key to the room on the 5th floor. Enter the room, take a red silk purse that is on the corner of the mantel shelf and give it to your father. It is important that he should have it before 11 o'clock. You promised me blind obedience, and I now remind you of that promise. Sinbad the Sailor." Julie uttered an exclamation of joy. Yet even in her joy she felt a certain uneasiness. Was there nothing to fear? Was this not all a trap that had been laid for her? She hesitated and decided to ask advice, but a strange feeling urged her to apply to Emmanuel rather than to her brother or her mother. She told him all that had happened the day Thompson and French's agent came to see her father, repeated the promise she had made, and showed him the letter. "You must go, mademoiselle," Emmanuel said, "and I shall go with you." "Then it is your opinion, Emmanuel," said the girl with some misgiving, "that I should carry out these instructions." "Listen," he said. "Today is the 5th of September, and at 11 o'clock your father must pay out nearly 300,000 francs, whereas he does not possess 15,000. What will happen then? If your father has not found someone to come to his aid by 11 o'clock, he will be obliged by 12 o'clock to declare himself bankrupt." "Come along, then, come," cried Julie, pulling Emmanuel after her. In the meantime, Madame Morel had told her son everything. He knew that after his father's successive misfortunes, all expenditure in the house had been rigidly cut down, but he was unaware that matters had come to such a pass. He was horror-struck. Then he suddenly rushed out of the room and ran upstairs, expecting to find his father in the office, but he received no answer to his repeated knocks. As he was waiting at the door, however, his father came from his bedroom. He uttered a cry of surprise at seeing Maximilian. He did not know of his arrival. He stood where he was, pressing with his left hand something he was trying to conceal under his coat. Maximilian ran down the stairs quickly and threw himself round his father's neck. Suddenly he drew back and stood there as pale as death. "Father," said he, "why have you a brace of pistols under your coat?" "Ah, I feared as much," murmured Morel. "Father, father," cried the young man, "in God's name, why have you got those weapons?" "Maximilian, you are a man and a man of honor," replied Morel, looking at his son with a fixed stare. "Come with me and I will tell you." With a firm step, Morel went up to his office, followed by Maximilian in great agitation. Morel closed the door behind his son, then crossing the antechamber, went to his desk, placed the pistols on a corner of the table, and pointed to the open ledger. The ledger gave an exact statement of his affairs. "Read that," said Morel. The young man read, and for a moment was quite overcome. Morel did not speak. What could he have said in face of the damning figures? "In half an hour, then," said Maximilian in a grim voice, "our name will be dishonored." "Blood washes out dishonor," said Morel. You are right, father, I understand. Morel was about to throw himself on his knees before his son, but Maximilian caught him in his arms, and for a moment these two noble hearts beat one against the other. You know it is not my fault, said Morel. Maximilian smiled. I know, father, that you are the most honorable man I have ever known. Good, my son, enough is said. Now go and rejoin your mother and sister. Father, said the young man, kneeling down, bless me. Morel seized his son's head between his two hands, and pressing his lips to it again and again, said, Yes, yes, I bless you in my own name, and in the name of 3 generations of irreproachable men. See to it, my son, that our name shall not be dishonored. Work, fight zealously and courageously. See that you, your mother and sister expend only what is strictly necessary, so that the sacred trust I leave to you of repaying my debts of honor may be speedily fulfilled. Think how glorious the day will be, how grand and solemn, when you can restore all, and when sitting at this same desk you will say, My father died because I could not do what I am doing today, but he died in peace and at rest because he knew he could put his faith in me. Oh, father, father, cried the young man, if only you could live. I should be looked upon as a man who has broken his word and failed in his engagements. If I lived, you would be ashamed of my name. When I am dead, you will raise your head and say, I am the son of him who killed himself because, for the first time in his life, he was unable to keep his word. Now, continued Morel, leave me alone and keep your mother away. Once more, farewell. Go. Go, I need to be alone. You will find my will in the desk in my room. When his son had gone, Morel sank into his chair and looked up at the clock. He had only 7 minutes left, and the hand seemed to move round with incredible rapidity. The pistols were loaded. Stretching out his hand, he seized one, murmuring his daughter's name. Putting the weapon down again, he took up his pen to write a few words. It occurred to him he might have been more affectionate in his farewell to his beloved daughter. Then he turned to the clock again. He no longer counted by minutes, but by seconds. Taking the weapon once more, he opened his mouth with his eyes on the clock. The noise he made in cocking the pistol sent a shiver through him. A cold perspiration broke out on his forehead, and he was seized by a mortal anguish. He heard the outer door creak on its hinges. The inner door opened. The clock was about to strike 11. Morel did not turn round. He put the pistol to his mouth. Suddenly he heard a cry. It was his daughter's voice. He turned round and saw Julie. The pistol dropped from his hands. Father, cried the girl, out of breath, overcome with joy. You are saved! You are saved! She threw herself into his arms, at the same time holding out to him a red silk purse. Saved, my child, said he. What do you mean? Yes, saved. See here. Morel started at sight of the purse, for he had a faint recollection that it had once belonged to him. He took it in his hand. At one end it held the receipt bill for 287,500 francs. At the other, a diamond as big as a nut, with these 2 words written on a piece of parchment attached to it: Julie's dowry. Morel passed his hand across his brow. He thought he must be dreaming. At the same moment the clock struck 11. Explain, my child, said he. Where did you find this purse? On the corner of the mantel-shelf of a miserable little room on the 5th floor of number 15, Allées de Melun. But this purse is not yours. Julie showed her father the letter she had received that morning. Just then Emmanuel came rushing in, full of excitement. The Pharaon, cried he, the Pharaon! What? The Pharaon? Are you mad, Emmanuel? You know quite well she is lost. Then in came Maximilian. Father, how could you say the Pharaon was lost? The lookout has just signaled her, and she is putting into port. If that is the case, my friend, said his father, it must be a miracle. Let us go and see, but God have pity on us if it is a false report. They all went out, and on the stairs met Madame Morel, who had not dared go into the office. They were soon on the Cannebière, where a large crowd was gathered. All made way for Morel, and every voice was calling out, "The Pharaon! The Pharaon!" True enough, though wonderful to relate, there in front of the St. Jean Tower was a ship with the words Pharaon, Morel and Son, Marseille. In white letters on her stern, she was the exact counterpart of the other Pharaon, and also carried a cargo of indigo and cochineal. She was casting her anchor with all sails brailed. On the deck, Captain Gaumard was issuing orders. As Morel and his son were embracing each other on the quay side, amid the applause of the onlookers, a man whose face was half hidden by a black beard, and who had been watching the scene from behind a sentry box, muttered to himself, "Be happy, noble heart. May you be blessed for all the good you have done and will do hereafter." And with a smile of joy he left his hiding place without being observed, descended the steps to the water, and called out 3 times, "Jacopo, Jacopo, Jacopo!" A shallop came alongside, took him on board, and conveyed him to a beautifully rigged yacht. He jumped on deck with the nimbleness of a sailor, and from thence once more gazed on the happy scene on the quay. "Now, farewell to kindness, humanity, gratitude," said he. "Farewell to all the sentiments which rejoice the heart. I have played the part of Providence in recompensing the good. May the God of vengeance now permit me to punish the wicked." Muttering these words, he made a sign, and the yacht immediately put out to sea. We continue on with chapter 26. Roman bandits. Toward the beginning of the year 1838, 2 young men belonging to the best society of Paris were staying at Florence. One was Viscount Albert de Morcerf, and the other Baron Franz d'Épinay. They had decided to spend the carnival together at Rome, and Franz, who had lived in Italy for more than 4 years, was to be his friend's cicerone, which is guide for sightseers. The more you know. As it is no small matter to spend the carnival at Rome, especially when you have no great desire to sleep in the Piazza del Popolo or the Campo Vaccino, they wrote to Signor Pastrini, the proprietor of the Hotel de Londres, to ask him to reserve a comfortable suite for them. On the Saturday evening before the carnival, they arrived in Rome. The suite reserved for them consisted of 2 small bedrooms and a sitting room. These bedrooms overlooked the street, a fact which Pastrini commented upon as a priceless advantage. The remaining rooms on that floor were let to an immensely rich gentleman who was supposed to be either a Sicilian or a Maltese. The proprietor was not quite sure which. "That is all very well, Pastrini," said Franz, "but we want some supper at once, and also a carriage for tomorrow and the following days." "You shall have supper instantly, signore. But as for the carriage, we will do all we can to procure one for you, and that is all I can say." "Then we shall harness the horses to mine. It is little the worse for the journey, but that doesn't matter." "You will not find any horses," said Pastrini. Albert looked at Franz with the expression of a man who has been given an incomprehensible answer. "Do you understand that, Franz? No horses? Then surely we can have post horses. They were hired out a month ago, and there are now none left but those absolutely necessary for the postal service." "What do you say to that?" asked Franz. What I say is that when a thing surpasses my comprehension, I cease to think about it at all. Supper ready, Pastrini? Yes, Excellency. Well then, let us go and have it. But what about the carriage and horses? Make your mind easy about that, my friend. They will come by themselves. It is only a question of price. And with that admirable philosophy, which believes nothing impossible to a full purse and a well-lined pocketbook, Morcerf supped, went to bed, and dreamed he was racing all over Rome in a carriage and six. The next morning, Franz was the first to wake and immediately rang the bell. The tinkling had not yet ceased when mine host appeared. Well, Excellency, said he triumphantly, I was quite right not to promise you anything yesterday. You are too late. There is not a single carriage to be had in Rome, in any case not for the last 3 days of the carnival. Well, I don't think much of your eternal city. That is so, Excellency. There are no more carriages to be had from Sunday morning till Tuesday evening, but until Sunday you can have 50 if you wish, replied Pastrini, anxious to preserve the dignity of the capital of the Christian world in the eyes of his guests. Ah, that is something, said Albert. Today is Thursday. Who knows what good things will come our way by Sunday? 10 to 12,000 tippers. 10 to 12,000 trippers to make it more difficult than ever, was Franz's reply. My friend, let us enjoy the present and give no thought to the evils of the future. I presume we can at least have a window? Asked Franz. Where? Overlooking the Corso, naturally. Impossible. Absolutely out of the question, exclaimed Pastrini. There was only one left on the 5th floor of the Doria Palace, and that has been taken by a Russian prince for 20 sequins a day. The two friends looked at each other, astounded. In that case, said Franz to Albert, we had better go to Venice for the carnival. Even if we don't find a carriage there, we shall be sure to find a gondola. No fear, cried Albert. I have made up my mind to see the carnival at Rome, and see it I will, even if I have to go about on stilts. Do your Excellencies still wish for a carriage until Sunday? What do you think? Said Albert. Do you imagine we are going to run about the streets of Rome on foot like lawyers' clerks? I will hasten to execute your Excellency's orders, said Pastrini. I will do my best, and I hope you may be satisfied. At what time do you wish the carriage? In an hour. Very well, Excellency. In an hour it shall be at the door. When Albert and Franz descended an hour later, the carriage was there. Where do your Excellencies wish to go? Asked the Cicerone. To St. Peter's, of course, and then on to the Colosseum, said Albert. Albert did not know, however, that it takes a day to see St. Peter's and a month to study it. Suddenly the two friends noticed that the day was drawing to a close. Franz took out his watch. It was 4:30. They immediately returned to the hotel. At the door, Franz ordered the coachman to be ready again at 8. He wanted to show Albert the Colosseum by moonlight, as he had seen St. Peter's by daylight. They were to leave by the Porta del Popolo, follow the outer walls, and return by the Porta San Giovanni. When they had finished their dinner, the innkeeper appeared before them. I hear, he said, that you have ordered the carriage for 8 o'clock, and that you propose visiting the Colosseum. You have heard aright. It is also true that you intend to start from the Porta del Popolo, then to follow the outer walls, and to return by the Porta San Giovanni? Those were my very words. Your itinerary is impossible, or to say the least very dangerous. Dangerous? Why? Because of the bandit, Luigi Vampa. Prick up your ears, Albert. Here is a bandit for you at last. Well, and what has that to do with my orders to the coachman to leave by the Porta del Popolo and return by the Porta San Giovanni? Simply that you may leave by the one and very much doubt whether you will return by the other. and because, as soon as night falls, one is not safe 50 yards from the gates. Here's a great adventure for us, old man, said Albert, turning to Franz. We will fill our carriage with pistols, blunderbusses, and double-barrel shotguns. Instead of Luigi Vampa holding us up, we will hold him up. We will take him to Rome and present him to His Holiness the Pope, who will ask us what recompense we desire for such great service. We shall merely ask for a carriage and a pair. Then we shall have a carriage for the carnival, and what is more, the Roman people will, in all probability, give expression to their gratitude by crowning us in the Capitol and proclaiming us the saviors of their country. Your Excellency knows that it is not customary to defend oneself when attacked by bandits. What? Cried Albert, whose courage revolted at the idea of letting himself be robbed without making any resistance. It is not customary, did you say? No, for it would be useless. What would you do against a dozen bandits suddenly springing out at you from a ditch, a ruin, or an aqueduct, with their guns leveled at your head? Albert poured himself out a glass of Lacrima Christi, which he drank in sips, muttering unintelligibly to himself all the time. Well, Signor Pastrini, and said Franz, now that my companion has cooled down and you can appreciate our peaceful intentions, tell us who this Luigi Vampa is. Is he a shepherd or a nobleman? Is he young or old, tall or short? Describe him to us, so that if by any chance we should meet him, we shall recognize him. I knew Luigi Vampa when he was a mere boy. He was a shepherd on a farm belonging to the Count di San Felice. He is now about 22 years of age and is of medium height. When hardly more than a youth, he killed the captain of a gang of bandits and himself became their captain. I fell into his hands once when going from Ferentino to Alatri. Luckily for me, he remembered me and not only set me free without making me pay a ransom, but also made me a present of a beautiful watch. What do you think of Luigi Vampa now, old man? Said Franz, turning to his friend. I say that he is a myth, and that he has never existed. Do you say he still carries on his business in the outskirts of Rome? Yes, and with a boldness unequaled by any before him. What do you think of Luigi Vampa now, old man? Said Franz, turning to his friend. I say that he is a myth, and that he has never existed. Do you say he still carries on his business in the outskirts of Rome? Yes, and with a boldness unequaled by any before him. What is his procedure in regard to foreigners? Oh, that is quite simple. According to the distance from the town, he gives them 8, 12, or 24 hours wherein to pay their ransom. After this time is elapsed, he grants an hour's grace. If he has not received the money by the 60th minute of that hour, he blows out his prisoner's brains with one shot, or thrusts a dagger into his heart, and the matter is ended. What do you think about that, Franz? Asked his companion. Are you still inclined to go to the Colosseum by the outer boulevards? Certainly, if the route is picturesque, was the reply. 9 o'clock struck, and the door opened to admit the coachman. Excellency, said he, your carriage is waiting. To the Colosseum, then, said Franz. By the Porta del Popolo, your Excellencies, or through the streets? Through the streets, most certainly, through the streets, cried Franz. Really, my dear friend, I thought you were braver than that, said Albert, rising and lighting his third cigar. The two young men went down the stairs and entered the carriage. Chapter 27. The Apparition. Franz arranged the route in such a way that Albert might reach the Colosseum without passing a single ancient ruin, so that nothing should attract his eye till the Colosseum itself burst upon him in all its gigantic proportions. They therefore followed the Via Sistina. Okay. The Via. They therefore followed the Via Sistina, cut across in front of Santa Maria Maggiore, and drove along the Via Urbana and by San Pietro in Vincoli until they came to the Via del Colosseo. Say that 3 times fast. When they arrived at the somber-looking and gigantic Colosseum, the long, pale rays of the moon were pouring through the gaping apertures in its massive walls. The carriage stopped a few yards from the Meta Sudans. The coachman opened the door of the carriage, whereupon the 2 young men leapt out and found themselves face to face with a cicerone who seemed to have sprung from nowhere. Franz had already visited the Colosseum some 10 times. His companion, however, had never set foot in it before, and it must be said to his credit that, in spite of the ignorant prattle of his guide, he was deeply impressed. And indeed, no one who has not beheld it can have any idea of the majesty of a ruin such as this, with its proportions magnified by the mysterious clearness of a southern moon which darts forth rays that are like the fantasy of an eastern twilight. Scarcely had Franz, the pensive one, gone 100 yards under the inner portals. However, when he left Albert to his guide, who would not renounce his prescriptive right to show him all around the lion's den, the loggia of the gladiators, the podium of the Caesars, ascending a half-dilapidated staircase, Franz seated himself in the shadow of a column, facing a niche which gave him an all-embracing view of the gigantic dimensions of this majestic ruin. He had been sitting thus for about a quarter of an hour when he seemed to hear a stone rolling down the staircase opposite the one by which he had ascended. It was no strange matter for a stone, loosened by age, to break away, but it seemed to Franz that this stone had been displaced by the pressure of a human foot, and that the sound of a muffled footstep reached his ears. He was not mistaken. A moment later, a man appeared, and from the hesitating manner in which he came up the last few steps and stopped at the top, apparently listening, it was obvious he had come for some particular purpose and was expecting to meet someone. Instinctively, Franz withdrew behind his column. The individual whose mysterious arrival had attracted his attention stood partly in the shadow of the ruins, so that Franz was unable to distinguish his features. Although the details of his dress were plainly discernible, he wore a large, dark brown cloak, one end of which was thrown over his left shoulder in such a way as to hide the lower part of his face, while a broad-brimmed hat concealed the upper part. He had been standing there for some minutes and began to show visible signs of impatience when another man appeared. "I crave your pardon for keeping you waiting, Excellency," said he with a Roman accent. "I am, however, but a few minutes late. It has just struck 10 by the clock on St. John Lateran. Lateran? I'm guessing Lateran. By the clock on St. John Lateran. I have just come from the castle of St. Angelo and had great difficulty in seeing Beppo." "Who is Beppo?" "Beppo is employed in the prison, and I pay him a small fee every year for information as to what is going on in His Holiness's palace." "Ha ha! I see you are a prudent man." "Why, just so, Excellency. One never knows what may happen. One day I may be entrapped like poor Peppino, and shall also be in need of a rat to gnaw the cords that keep me a prisoner. To come to the point, what news did you glean?" "There will be 2 executions on Tuesday at 2 o'clock. As is customary in Rome at the commencement of all great festivals, one of the condemned men will be mausolato." "Oof!" Mutilated. Okay. Mazzolato. He is a worthless wretch who has murdered the priest that brought him up, and therefore deserves no pity. The other one will be decapitado. That one makes sense. Beheaded. And he, your excellency, is no other than poor Peppino. What can you expect, my dear friend? You have struck such terror into the pontifical government and the neighboring kingdoms that they are going to make an example of him. But Peppino does not even belong to my gang. He is a poor shepherd whose only crime consisted in supplying us with provisions, which certainly made him your accomplice. But mark the consideration that is being shown him. Instead of clubbing him to death, as they would do to you if they ever get a hold of you, they content themselves with merely guillotining him. I am in the mood to do anything and everything to prevent the execution of this poor wretch who has got himself into trouble by doing me a service. Per la Madonna! I should be a coward if I did not do something for the poor fellow. What do you intend doing? I shall place a score of men round the scaffold, and the moment they bring him out I shall give the signal. And with daggers drawn, my men and I will throw ourselves on the guard and carry off their prisoner. That seems to me very risky. I veritably believe my plan is better than yours. What is your plan, Excellency? I shall give 10,000 piastres to a friend of mine who will arrange to have Peppino's execution delayed until next year. In the course of the year I shall give another 10,000 piastres to someone else I know, by which means his escape from prison shall be effected. Are you sure of success? I shall do more with my gold than you and your people will do with all your daggers, pistols, carbines, and blunderbusses. Leave it to me. Splendid. We will, however, keep ourselves in readiness in case your plan should fail. Certainly do so if you like, but you can count on the reprieve. How shall we know whether you have been successful? That is easily arranged. I have hired the 3 last widows of the Café Ruspole. Okay. The last 3 windows of the Café Ruspole. If I obtain the reprieve, the 2 corner windows will be draped in yellow damask, while the center one will be hung with white damask, having a large red cross marked upon it. Excellent! But who will bring the reprieve? Send me one of your men disguised as a friar, and I will give it to him. His dress will give him access to the foot of the scaffold. There he can give the bull to the officer in charge, who will hand it to the executioner. In the meantime, however, I will advise you to let Peppino know, lest he should die of fright or go mad, which would mean that we had gone to unnecessary expenditure on his behalf. If you save Peppino, Excellency, you may count not only on my devotion to you, but on my absolute obedience. Be careful what you say, my friend. I may remind you of that one day. Shh! I hear a noise. It is unnecessary for us to be seen together. All these guides are spies, and they might recognize you. And though I appreciate your friendship, I fear my reputation would suffer if they knew we were on such a friendly footing. Farewell, then, Excellency. I rely on you as you may rely on me. With these words, the last speaker disappeared down the stairs, while the other, covering himself more closely with his cloak, almost touched Franz as he descended to the arena by the outer steps. Just then Franz heard his name echoing through the vault. It was Albert, calling him. 10 minutes later, the two were rumbling along toward the hotel, and Franz was listening in a very indifferent and distracted manner to the learned dissertations Albert made. In the style of Pliny and Calpurnius, Pliny and Calpurnius, on the iron-pointed nets used to prevent the ferocious beasts from springing on the spectators. He let him talk on, without interruption. He wanted to be alone to think undisturbed over what had happened. The next day, Franz had several letters to write and left Albert to his own devices. Albert made the most of his time. He took his letters of an introduction to their addresses, and he received invitations for every evening. He also achieved the great feat of seeing all Rome in one day, and spent the evening at the opera. Moreover, by the time he reached his hotel, he had solved the carriage question. When the two friends were smoking their last cigar in their sitting room before retiring for the night, Albert suddenly said, "I have arranged a little surprise for you. You know how impossible it is to procure a carriage. Well, I have a wonderful idea." Franz looked at his friend as though he had no great confidence in his imagination. "We cannot get a carriage and horses, but what about a wagon and a pair of oxen?" Franz stared, and a smile of amused interest played about his lips. Oh, enjoy D&D Liminal? Yes, a wagon and a yoke of oxen. We will have the wagon decorated, and we will dress ourselves up as Neapolitan harvesters and represent a living picture after the magnificent painting by Leopoldo Robert. Robert. Okay. Leopoldo Robert. "Bravo!" exclaimed Franz. "For once you have hit upon a capital idea. Have you told anyone about it?" "I have told our host. When I came in, I sent for him and explained to him all that I should require. He assured me that it would be quite easy to obtain everything. I wanted to have the oxen's horns decorated, but he told me it would take 3 days to do it, so we must do without this superfluidity. Fluidity? Yeah. Superfluidity. That is a word. Superfluidity. Okay. Superfluity. Superfluity. That is a word. We must do without this superfluity. Where is our host now?" "Gone out in search of our things." As he spoke, the door opened, and their landlord put his head in. "Permesso?" said he. "Certainly," Franz replied. "Well, have you found the wagon and oxen for us?" said Albert. "I have done better than that," he replied, in a very self-satisfied manner. "Your Excellencies are aware that the Count of Monte Cristo is on the same floor as yourselves. Hearing of the dilemma in which you are placed, he offers you 2 seats in his carriage and 2 seats at his window in the Palazzo Rospoli." Albert and Franz. Yeah, okay, it should be Albert. Okay. Albert and Franz exchanged looks. "But can we accept this offer from a stranger, a man we do not even know?" asked Albert. "It seems to me," said Franz to Albert, "that if this man is as well mannered as our host says he is, he would have conveyed his invitation to us in some other way, either in writing or—" At this instant there was a knock at the door. "Come in," said Franz. A servant wearing a very smart livery made his appearance. "From the Count of Monte Cristo to the Monsieur Franz d'Epinay and the Viscount Albert de Morcerf," said he, handing 2 cards to the host, who gave them to the young men. "The Count of Monte Cristo asks permission to call upon you tomorrow morning," continued the servant. "He will be honored to know what hour is convenient to you." "Upon my word, there is nothing to find fault with here," said Albert to Franz. "Everything is as it should be." "Tell the Count that, on the contrary, we shall do ourselves the honor of calling upon him." The servant withdrew. "That is what I should call assaulting us with politeness," said Albert. "Signor Pastrini, your Count of Monte Cristo is a very gentlemanly fellow." "You accept his offer, then?" "Of course we do," replied Albert. "Nevertheless, I must own that I regret the wagon and the harvesters. And if it were not for the window at the Palazzo Rospoli to compensate us for our loss, I think I should revert to my first idea. What about you, Franz?" "The window in the Palazzo Rospoli is the deciding point with me, too." In truth, The offer of 2 seats in the Palazzo Ruspoli reminded Franz of the conversation he had overheard in the ruins of the Colosseum, when the man in the cloak undertook to obtain the condemned man's reprieve. Were he and the Count one and the same person? Were he and the Count one and the same person? He would doubtless recognize him, and then nothing would deter him from satisfying his curiosity regarding him. The next morning Franz woke up at 8 o'clock, and as soon as he was dressed, sent for the landlord, who presented himself with his usual obsequiousness. "Signor Pastrini," said Franz, "is there not an execution today?" "There is, your Excellency, but if you ask me because you wish to have a window, it is too late." "No, that is not the reason," replied Franz. "What I want to know is how many condemned men there are, their names, and the nature of their punishment." "What a bit of good luck, your Excellency. They have just brought me the tavolette." "Okay, tavolette. What are the tavolette?" They are wooden tablets put up on They are wooden tablets put up at the corners of the streets on the evening before an execution, giving the names of the condemned men, the reason of their condemnation, and the nature of their punishment. The purpose of the notice is to invite the faithful to pray to God that he may grant the culprit sincere repentance. "I should like to read one of the tavolettes," said Franz. "Nothing could be easier," said the landlord, opening the door. "I have had one put on the landing." Taking the tavolette from the wall, he handed it to Franz. A literal translation of the wording on the tablet is as follows. It is hereby known to all that the following will be executed in the Piazza del Popolo by order of Rota Tribunal on Tuesday, the 22nd of February, on the first day of Carnival. Andrea Rondolo, accused of the murder of the highly honored and venerable priest Don Cesar Terlini, canon at the Church of St. John Lateran, and Peppino, alias Rocca Priori, accused of complicity with the detestable bandit Luigi Vampa and other members of his gang. The first named shall be Mazzolato, the latter shall be decapitato. There we go. All charitable souls are hereby entreated to pray to God grant these two unfortunates the grace of sincere repentance. Hey, Ryan, welcome in. This was exactly what Franz had heard the previous evening in the ruins of the Colosseum. Time was passing. However, it was 9 o'clock, and Franz was just going to waken Albert when, to his great astonishment, he came out of his room fully dressed. "Well, now that we are ready, do you think we could go and pay our respects to the Count of Monte Cristo?" Franz inquired of his host. "Certainly," was the reply. "The Count of Monte Cristo is an early riser, and I feel sure he has been up these 2 hours." "Then you do not think we shall be committing an act of indiscretion if we call on him now?" "I am sure we should not." "Then, Albert, if you are ready, let us go and thank our neighbor for his courtesy." They had only to cross the landing. The landlord preceded them and rang the bell. A servant opened the door. "I, Signori Francesi," said the landlord. Francesi. The servant bowed and invited them to enter. They were conducted through 2 rooms, more luxuriously furnished than they had thought possible in Pastrini's hotel, and were then shown into a very elegant sitting room. A Turkey carpet covered the parquet floor, and the most comfortably upholstered settee and chairs seemed to invite one to their soft, well-sprung seats and slanting backs. Magnificent paintings intermingled with glorious war trophies decorated the walls, while rich tapestried curtains hung before the door. "If your Excellencies will take a seat," said the servant. I will let the Count know you are here. And he disappeared through one of the doors. As the door opened, the sound of guzla, a Balkan-stringed instrument played with a bow, guzla, reached the ears of the two friends, but was immediately lost, the door being closed almost as soon as it was opened. Merely permitted one swell of harmony to penetrate the room. Franz and Albert looked at one another and then at the furniture, pictures, and trophies. On closer inspection, it all appeared to them even more magnificent than at first. Well, what do you think of it all? Franz asked his friend. Upon my word, I think our neighbor must be some stockbroker who has speculated all on the fall of Spanish funds, or else some prince traveling incognito. Hush, hush! That is what we are now going to find out, for here he comes. As he finished speaking, the sound of a door turning on its hinges was heard, and almost immediately the tapestry was drawn aside to admit the owner of all these riches. Albert advanced toward him, but Franz remained glued to his seat. He who entered was no other than the cloaked man of the Colosseum. Chapter 28. The Carnival at Rome. Messieurs, said the Count of Monte Cristo as he entered, pray accept my excuses for allowing myself to be forestalled, but I feared I might disturb you if I called on you at an early hour. Besides, you advised me you were coming, and I held myself at your disposal. Franz and I owe you 1,000 thanks, Count, said Albert. You have truly extricated us from a great dilemma. Indeed, returned the Count, motioning the two young men to be seated on a settee. It is only that idiot Pastrini's fault that you were not relieved of your anxiety sooner. As soon as I learnt that I could be of use to you, I eagerly seized the opportunity of paying you my respects. The two young men bowed. Franz had not yet found anything to say. He was still undecided whether this was the same man he had seen at the Colosseum. He determined, therefore, to turn the conversation to a subject which might possibly throw light on the situation. You have offered us seats in your carriage, Count, said he, as well as at your window in the Palazzo Rospoli. Could you now tell us where we can obtain a view of the Piazza del Popolo? Yes, I believe there is to be an execution in the Piazza del Popolo, is there not? Said the Count in a casual tone. That is so, replied Franz, delighted to see that the Count was at last coming to the point he wished. Just one moment. I believe I told my steward to attend to this yesterday. Perhaps I can be of service to you in this matter also. He put out his hand toward the bell rope and pulled it 3 times. The Count's steward immediately appeared. Signor Bertuccio. Signor Italian's almost as hard to say as the French. Signor Bertuccio, said the Count, have you procured a window overlooking the Piazza del Popolo, as I instructed you to do? Yes, Excellency, replied the steward, but it was very late. What? What? Oh, no! What? Said the Count, frowning. Did I not tell you that I wanted one? And your Excellency has one, the one which had been let to Prince Lobaniev, but I had to pay 100. That will do, Signor Bertuccio. Spare these gentlemen such domestic details. You have procured a window, and that is all I want to know. Give the coachman the address, and hold yourself in readiness on the staircase to conduct us thither. You may go. The steward bowed and was about to retire when the Count said, Ah, be good enough to ask Signor Pastrini if he has received the tablette, and if he will send me the program of the execution. It is unnecessary, said Franz, taking his notebook from his pocket. I have seen the tablets and copied them here. Very well. In that case, I require nothing more. You can retire. Let me know when breakfast is ready. Then, turning to Albert and Franz, he said, You will, I hope, do me the honor of staying to breakfast with me. Nay, Count, that would really be abusing your hospitality, replied Albert. Not at all. On the contrary, you will give me great pleasure, and perhaps one of you, or even both, will return the compliment one day in Paris. Signor Bertuccio, have covers laid for 3. He took the notebook out of Franz's hand. We were saying, he continued in the same tone in which he would have read a gossipy newspaper paragraph, that the following will be executed on the Piazza del Popolo by order of the Rota Tribunal on Tuesday, the 22nd of February, the first day of the Carnival. Andrea Rondolo, accused of the murder of the highly honored and venerable priest Don Cesar Terlini, canon of the Church of St. John Lateran, and Peppino, alias Rocca Priori, accused of complicity with the detestable bandit Luigi Vampa and the other members of his gang. The first name shall be Mazzolatto. The latter shall be Decapitato. All charitable souls are hereby entreated to pray God to grant these 2 unfortunate the grace of sincere repentance. The first name shall be Mazzolatto, and the latter shall be Decapitato. Quite right, continued the Count. This is how it was arranged first, but since yesterday, I think, some change has been made in the order of the ceremony. Really? Said Franz. Yes. I spent yesterday evening with Cardinal Rospigliosi, and there was a question of one of the 2 condemned men being reprieved. Andrea Rondolo? Asked Franz. No, the Count answered carelessly, the other one. He glanced at the notebook as if to recall the name. Peppino, alias Rocca Priori. It will deprive you of seeing a man guillotined, but there is still the Mazzolata, which is an extraordinary and interesting form of punishment when you see it for the first time, and even for the second time. You asked me for a seat at my window. Well, you shall have it. But let us first sit down to table, for they are just coming to inform us that breakfast is ready. And in truth, a servant opened one of the 4 doors, saying, Al suo commodo. They all rose and passed into the dining room. Al suo commodo. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, as you please in Italian. They all rose and passed into the dining room. At the end of the breakfast, Franz took out his watch. Well, said the Count, what are you doing? Excuse us, Count, said Franz, but we have 1,001 things to attend to. What things? We have no disguises, and they cannot be dispensed with today. Do not concern yourselves about that. As far as I know, we have a private room in the Piazza del Popolo. I will have any costumes you desire sent there, and we can change into our disguises on the spot. After the execution, after, during, or before, just as you like. In front of the scaffold? The scaffold is part of the festival. Count, upon reflection, I shall content myself with accepting a seat in your carriage and in the window of the Palazzo Rospoli, but I leave you free to dispose of my seat in the window of the Piazza del Popolo, though I appreciate your courtesy. But I warn you, you will miss a very curious sight, was the Count's reply. You will tell me all about it, replied Franz, and I am convinced that the recital from your lips will make almost as great an impression on me as the sight itself. More than once have I wished to witness an execution, but have never been able to make up my mind to do it. I should very much like to pass through the Corso, continued he. Would that be possible? It would on foot, but not in a carriage. Well, then, I shall go on foot. Is it necessary for you to go down the Corso? Yes, I want to see something. In that case, the carriage can wait for us at the Piazza del Popolo. I shall be quite pleased to go along the Corso myself, to see whether some orders I have given have been executed. Excellency, said the servant, opening the door, a man in a habit of a friar wishes to speak with you. Ah, yes, I know what he wants, said the Count. If you go into the salon, you will find some excellent Havana cigars on the center table. I will rejoin you in a minute. The 2 young men arose and went out by one door, while the Count, after renewing his apologies, left by the other. Well, what do you think of the Count of Monte Cristo? Asked Franz of his friend. What do you think? What do I think of him? Said Albert, obviously astonished that his companion should ask him such a question. I think he is a charming man who does the honors of his table to perfection. A man who has seen much, studied much, and thought much, who, like Brutus, belongs to the school of the Stoics, and who possesses most excellent cigars, he added appreciatively, sending out a whiff of smoke which rose to the ceiling in spirals. Me repeatedly saying, okay, fair. Rospoli, what was the other one? There was another word. There's popolo. Yeah, popolo. Nah, Italian. I don't know what to tell you. They have the beautiful round bubbly words. That was Albert's opinion of the Count. And as Franz knew that he prided himself on forming an opinion of men and things only after mature reflection, he did not attempt to change his own opinion of him. But did you notice how attentively, okay. But did you notice how attentively he looked at you? At me? Yes. Albert thought for a moment. Ah, that is not surprising, he said with a sigh. I have been away from Paris for nearly a year, and my clothes must have become old-fashioned. The Count probably thinks I come from the provinces. Undeceive him, old man, and the first opportunity you have, tell him that this is not the case. Franz smiled, and an instant later the Count returned. Here I am, messieurs, he said, and entirely at your service. I have given the necessary orders. The carriage will go to the Piazza del Popolo, and we shall go down the Corso if you really wish to. Take some of those cigars, Monsieur de Morcerf. By Jove, I shall be delighted, said Albert, for your Italian cigars are awful. When you come to Paris, I shall return all this hospitality. I will not refuse. I hope to go there some day, and with your permission I shall pay you a visit. Come along, messieurs. We have no time to lose. It is 12:30. Let us be off. All three went out together. And, passing the Piazza di Spagna, Piazza di Spagna, went along the Via Fratina. Man, these Italians, these Italian words. Went along the Via Fratina, which led them straight to the Fiano and Rospoli palaces. Franz's whole attention was directed to the windows of the Palazzo Rospoli. He had not forgotten the signal agreed upon by the cloaked man and his mysterious companion. Which are your windows? He asked the Count as naturally as he could. The last three, replied the Count with a carelessness which was quite unaffected, for he could not guess the reason of the question. Franz rapidly looked up at the three windows. The side windows were draped with yellow damask, and the center one with white damask having a red cross on it. The man in the cloak had kept his word, and there was no doubt that the cloaked man and the Count were one and the same person. By this time the carnival had begun in real earnest. Picture the wide and beautiful Corso, lined from end to end with tall palaces, with their balconies tapestried and the windows draped, and at these windows and balconies 300,000 spectators. Romans, Italians, and strangers from every part of the world, aristocrats by birth side by side with the aristocrats by wealth and genius, charming women who, succumbing to the influence of the spectacle, bent over the balconies or leaned out of the windows showering confetti on the carriages and catching bouquets hurled up at them in return. The air thickened with sweetmeats thrown down and flowers thrown up. In the streets, a gay, untiring, mad crowd in fantastic costumes. Gigantic cabbages walking about, buffalo heads bellowing on human bodies, dogs walking on their hind legs. In the midst of all this, a mask is raised, revealing, as in Calitz's dream, of the temptation of Saint Antony, a beautiful face that one follows only to be separated from it by these troops of demons. such as one meets in one's dreams. Picture all this to yourself, and you have a faint idea of the carnival at Rome. When they had driven round for the second time, the Count stopped the carriage and asked his companions permission to quit them. Leaving his carriage at their disposal, Franz looked up. They were opposite the Palazzo Rospoli. At the center window, the one hung with white damask with a red cross, was a blue domino. In the midst of all this, a mask is raised, revealing, as in Calit's dream of the temptation of St. Antony, a beautiful face that one follows only to be separated from it by these troops of demons such as one meets in one's dreams. Picture all this to yourself, and you have a faint idea of the carnival at Rome. When they had driven round for the second time, the Count stopped the carriage and asked his companions permission to quit them. Leaving his carriage at their disposal, Franz looked up. They were opposite the Palazzo Rospoli. At the center window, the one hung with white damask with a red cross, was a blue domino. Messieurs, said the Count, jumping out, when you are tired of being actors and wish to become spectators, you know you have seats at my windows. In the meantime, my coachman, my window, and my servants are at your disposal. Franz thanked the Count for his kind offer. Albert, however, was busy coquetting with a carriage full of Roman peasants, who had taken their stand near the Count's carriage, and was throwing bouquets at them. Unfortunately for him, the line of carriages drove on, and while he went toward the Piazza del Popolo, the carriage that had attracted his attention moved on toward the Palazzo di Venezia. In spite of Albert's hopes, he could boast of no other adventure that day than that he had passed the carriage with the Roman peasants 2 or 3 times. Once, whether by accident or intentionally, his mask fell off. He took his remaining bouquets and threw them into the carriage. One of the charming ladies, whom Albert suspected to be disguised in the coquettish peasant's costume, was doubtless touched by this gallantry, for when the friend's carriage passed the next time, she threw him a bouquet of violets. Albert seized it and put it victoriously into his buttonhole, while the carriage continued its triumphant course. Well, said Franz, here is the beginning of an adventure. Laugh as much as you like, said Albert. I think you are right, though. Anyway, I shall not let this bouquet go. I should think not, indeed. It is a token of gratitude. The Count of Monte Cristo had given definite orders that his carriage should be at their disposal for the remaining days of the carnival, and they were to make use of it without fear of trespassing too much on his kindness. The young men decided to take advantage of the Count's courtesy, and the next afternoon, having replaced their costume of the previous evening, which was somewhat the worse for the numerous combats they engaged in, by a Roman peasant's attire, they gave orders for the horses to be harnessed. With a sentimental touch, Albert slipped the bouquet of faded violets in his buttonhole. They started forth and hastened toward the Corso by the Via Vittoria. When they were going round the Corso for the second time, a bouquet of fresh violets was thrown into their carriage, one filled with pierrettes. Pierrettes? Female clowns. Okay. Pierrettes. From which it was quite clear to Albert that the contadine, peasant girl, okay, that the contadine of the previous evening had also changed their costumes, and that whether by chance or whether both parties had been prompted by a similar sentiment, he was now wearing their costume, and they were wearing his. Albert put the fresh flowers into his buttonhole, but kept the faded ones in his hand, and when he again met the carriage, he put it amorously to his lips, which appeared to afford great amusement, not only to the one who had thrown it, but also to her gay companions. The day was no less animated than the previous evening. It is even probable that a keen observer would have noted more noise and gaiety. Once the two friends saw the Count at his window, but when they next passed, he had disappeared. Needless to say, the flirtation between Albert and the Pierrette with the violets lasted the whole day. When they returned home in the evening, Franz found a letter awaiting him from the ambassador, informing him that he would have the honor of being received by His Holiness on the morrow. At each previous visit to Rome, he had solicited and been granted the same honor, and moved by a religious feeling as much as by gratitude. He did not wish to leave the capital of the Christian world without paying his respectful homage at the feet of one of the successors of St. Peter, who has been such a rare example of all virtues. There was, therefore, no question of the carnival for him that day, for, in spite of his simplicity and kindness, the grandeur of the noble and holy old man whom they called Gregory the 16th was such the one was always filled with awe and respectful emotion at the thought of kneeling before him. On leaving the Vatican, Franz went straight to the hotel, carefully avoiding the Corso. He had brought away with him a treasure of pious thoughts, and he felt it would be profanation. Interesting. Treasure of pious thoughts, and he felt it would be a profanation to go near the mad gaiety of the masquerade. Okay. Mascherata for some little time. Don't forget to stretch. You got it. Hey, Lime, welcome in. For those of you not familiar, Agent Slow Lime is a secret agent VTuber, variety streamer, and a pretty awesome guy. You guys should go check out his content. Okay, hydrate, caffeinate, snack, all the things. I'll just make a care package. Secret Agent Lime. Da 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 da. You got it. And a bonk, my goodness, Sloth. How dare. Okay. At 10 minutes past 5, Albert entered, overjoyed. The Pierrette had reassumed her peasant's costume, and as she passed his carriage had raised her mask. She was charming to behold. Franz congratulated Albert, who received his congratulations with the air of a man conscious that they were merited. He had recognized by certain unmistakable signs that his fair incognita belonged to the aristocracy, and had made up his mind to write to her the next day. Though given no details, Franz noticed that Albert had something to ask him, but hesitated to formulate the request. He insisted upon it, however, declaring beforehand that he was willing to make any sacrifice for his pleasure. Albert's reluctance to tell his friend his secret lasted just as long as politeness demanded, and then he confessed to Franz that he would do him a great favor by permitting him to go in the carriage alone the next day, for he attributed to Franz's absence the extreme kindness of the fair contadina in raising her mask. Maybe. Franz was not so selfish as to stand in Albert's way, and in the case of an adventure that promised to prove so agreeable to his curiosity and so flattering to his vanity, he felt assured that his friend would duly blurt out to him all that happened, and as a similar piece of good fortune had never fallen to his share during their 3 years that he had traveled in Italy, Franz was by no means sorry to learn what was the proper thing to do on such an occasion. He therefore promised Albert that he would be quite pleased to witness the carnival on the morrow from the windows of the Rospoli Palace. The next morning he saw Albert pass and repass. He held an enormous bouquet, which he, doubtless, meant to make the bearer of his amorous epistle. The probability was changed into certainty when Franz saw the bouquet, a beautiful bunch of white camellias, in the hands of a charming Pierrette dressed in rose-colored satin. The evening was no longer joy, but ecstasy. Albert did not doubt the fair unknown would reply in the same manner, nor was he mistaken, for the next evening saw him enter triumphantly, waving a folded paper he held by the corner. "Well," said he, "what did I tell you?" "She has answered you," said Franz. "Read." Franz took the letter and read. At 7 o'clock on Tuesday evening, descend from your carriage opposite the Via de Pontefici. Opposite Via de Pontefici, and follow the Roman peasant who snatches your mocoletto from you. Racehorses. Okay. When you arrive at the first step of the church of Saint Giacomo, I think Giacomo, like Jacob. When you arrive at the first step of the church of Saint Giacomo, be sure to fasten a knot of rose-colored ribbons to the shoulder of your Periol's costume, so that you will be recognized. Until then, you will not see me. Constancy and discretion. "Well," asked he, when Franz had finished reading, "what do you think of that?" "I think that the adventure is looking decidedly interesting. If my unknown be as amiable as she is beautiful," said Albert, "I shall stay at Rome for at least 6 weeks. I adore Rome, and I have always had a great taste for archaeology." Archaeology. Ah, my goodness. "Yes, to be sure, 2 or 3 more such adventures, and I do not despair of seeing you as a member of the Academy." At length, Tuesday, the last and most tumultuous day of the carnival, arrived. The day on which the theaters open at 10 o'clock in the morning and Lent begins at 8 in the evening. The day when all those who, through lack of money or enthusiasm, have not taken part in the carnival before, let themselves be drawn into the orgy and gaiety and contribute to the general noise and excitement. From 2 o'clock till 5, Franz and Albert followed in the line of carriages, exchanging handfuls of confetti with other carriages and pedestrians who crowded about the horses, feet, and the carriage wheels without a single accident, a single dispute, or a single fight. Albert was triumphant in his Perrault costume, with a knot of rose-colored ribbons falling from his shoulder almost to the ground. As the day advanced, the tumult became greater. On the pavement, in the carriages, at the windows, there was not one silent tongue, not one idle hand. It was in truth a human storm, composed of a thunder of shouts and a hail of sweetmeats, flowers, eggs, oranges, and nosegays. At 3 o'clock the sound of rockets let off in the Piazza del Popolo and at the Palazzo di Venezia, heard but dimly amid the din and confusion, announced that the races were about to begin, like the Moccoli. The races were one of the episodes peculiar to the last days of Carnival. At the sound of the rockets, the carriage instantly broke the ranks and retired by the nearest by-streets. The pedestrians ranged themselves against the walls. The trampling of horses and the clashing of steel was heard. A detachment of carabineers, 15 abreast, galloped up the Corso to clear it for Barberi. Almost instantly, in the midst of a tremendous and general outcry, 7 or 8 horses, excited by the shouts of 3,000 spectators, passed by with lightning speed. Then 3 cannons were fired to indicate the number 3 had won, whereupon the carriages moved on again toward the Corso. surging down all the streets like torrents which, pent up for a while, flow back more rapidly than ever into the parent river, and the immense stream again continued its course between its two granite banks. A new source of noise and movement was given to the crowd when the moccoletti appeared on the scene. These are candles which vary in size from the paschal taper to the rushlight, and which awaken in the actors of the great scene which terminates the carnival two opposed ideas. The first is how to keep their own moccoletti alight, and the second, how to extinguish those of the others. Night was rapidly approaching, and already, at the cry of Moccoletti, repeated by the shrill voices of 1,000 vendors, 2 or 3 stars began to twinkle amidst the crowd. It was a signal. At the end of 10 minutes, 50,000 lights were glittering. It seemed like a dance of jack-o'-lanterns. It is impossible to form any idea of it without having seen it. Imagine all the stars come down from the sky and mingling in a wild dance on the face of the earth, the whole accompanied by cries never heard in any other part of the world. Irrespective of class, the mad revelers blow, extinguish, relight. Had Aeolus appeared at this moment, he would have been proclaimed king of the Moccoli, and Aquilo the heir presumptive to the crown. This flaming frolic continued for 2 hours. The Corso was light as day. The features of the spectators on the 3rd and 4th stories were visible. Every 5 minutes, Albert took out his watch, and at length it pointed to 7. The two friends were at that moment in the Via dei Pontefici. Albert sprang out of the carriage, moccoletto in hand. 2 or 3 masks strove to tear it from him, to extinguish it, but being a neat boxer, Albert sent them sprawling one after the other, and continued his course toward the church of St. Giacomo. The steps were crowded with curious and masked revelers, striving to snatch the torches from each other's hands. Franz watched Albert's progress and saw him put his foot on the first step. A masked lady, wearing the well-known peasant's costume, instantly stretched out her hand and, without meeting with any resistance, snatched the moccoletto from him. Franz was too far away to hear the words that passed between them, but they must have been friendly, for he saw them go away together, arm in arm. He watched them for some time, making their way through the crowd, but lost sight of them in the Via Mossello. Suddenly the bell sounded, signaling the close of Carnival, and at the same moment, all the moccoletti were extinguished, as if by magic. It was just as though one tremendous gust of wind had risen, carrying everything before it, and Franz found himself in complete darkness. The shouts ceased, just as suddenly as though the strong wind had not only blown out the lights, but also carried all the noise with it. No sound was heard, save the rolling of carriages taking the revelers to their homes. No lights were to be seen, save those at a few isolated windows. The carnival was over.